Okay, so welcome everybody. Today is March 18th, and we are I'm so excited to welcome David Suich, who is a researcher with 12 years of experience in near-death experience research. My name is Diana Montijo. I am a holistic healing practitioner here to you today from the Fig Garden Wellness Center. And we are going to give David an opportunity to introduce himself and his work. We're going to have a little bit of discussion and some time for questions. So with that said, David, thank you so much for accepting my invitation to meet with us. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad to talk with a small group like this. That's my favorite thing to do. It's a nice small group where we can have some interaction and good questions.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you interested in studying near-death experiences?
Well, it was 1999, and I was working as an engineer for Semper Energy, nation's largest utility, and I was doing well. And then I came down with tendonitis. It started my hands, it went to my feet, my jaw, and it got so bad that by 2007 I was having a hard time working, and I fall into a deep depression. And I was I knew nothing about near death experiences at that time, and I was a Christian, and so I thought, well, I'll just get prayed for, and God will heal me. And I had been prayed over the 8 years that I'd had it by probably a dozen churches, and been prayed for by hundreds, maybe even 1,000 people. I don't know. And nothing. And so I came to a very painful conclusion, and I thought, well, one of two things is happening here. One, either there is no God, and I didn't think that was right, or more likely there's a God, but he doesn't care about me because I'm not a good son. I'm a disobedient Christian, or I haven't been a good, so I'm the one he's embarrassed of. He's not gonna do me any favors. And that was a painful conclusion. And so I was at home. I was off work for a couple of weeks, just trying to recover enough to start working again. And I clicked on a YouTube video, and YouTube was pretty new back then. I think it was like 2 years old in 2007. And so there weren't too many near-death experience videos on there. And it just came up my feed. I wasn't searching for it. And it was this guy who was an atheist, and he died. He found himself in sort of a hellish afterlife experience. He called out to Jesus for help and got rescued. And I was in sales. I got training for how to spot a lie, and this guy didn't show any of the signs of lying. Matter of fact, it's the opposite. He's every sign of being sincere he was showing. And I thought, wow, that's quite a story. And so I started looking into it, and it just kind of snowballed from there. And then when I started writing my book, I'd tell people, and I found out my own aunt, when she gave birth to my cousin many years ago, had a near-death experience who was in heaven. She didn't tell anybody about it. She told me about it. The guy I was shopping for a car, and the guy was missing an arm, and I didn't ask him what was going on. And he told me, jet skiing accident. I arrived DOA at the hospital. I said, well, did you out of your body? Did you see a light? And his eyes got real big. Did that happen to you? No, I'm writing your book. And he stopped, and he told me his whole testimony. And so, yeah, it just snowballed. And now here it is 15 years later. And I stopped counting at 700, but if I had to calculate, it's probably around 1,000 or 1,200 NDEs. And then there's some people have heard 5,000. So I'm kind of a newbie in the big scheme of things. Yeah.
And
so that's how it got started. Yeah.
so do you find like people feel like they could tell you just about anything, right? Because if that's like a story that's like way out there that isn't mainstream, to put it that way. And so they probably could tell you about the other things, like what we were talking about earlier, those kinds of subjects we were talking about. You probably get a lot of that. And I remembered the name of the show we were talking the other day. It was called I Survived Beyond and Back.
Yes, I remember that.
And that gentleman you were talking about, he spoke about seeing the specific story. I think we're talking about the same story. He said he saw like he was in a void of darkness, and it wasn't like hell, brimstone, and fire. It was actually cold and very depressive, oppressive, depressive, with no hope whatsoever, no light, no anything. And he saw that when he cried out to God, he saw the tiniest poke of a hole. And he said, literally, a hand so big that it had to have been the hand of God reached and grabbed him by the collar and pulled him out of that void that to him felt like hell. Is that the same story?
No, but it's a similar one. And about 5% of the NDEs were negative NDEs. But it's kind of interesting. In every single case, when a person's having a negative NDE, in every single case when they cry out for help, they're always rescued 100% of the time. I have yet to find a testimony where, they called for help and nothing. So that's encouraging.
And it changes their life.
Oh, yeah. Whether they're positive or negative, they come back changed. Whatever they had been chasing in their life before, whether it was career or money or a certain hobby, that always takes a back seat, and they become sort of less materialistic, more altruistic. Their primary goal is to make a valuable contribution to humanity, show love to their fellow human beings. They tend to change careers. One guy who was a billionaire, after his NDE, he gave up all his ties to finance and became a certified family counselor. Another man who was involved in organized crime became a counselor for teenagers who were in trouble with the law. A policeman gave up his job and became a high school teacher. And of course, the very first one I ever heard, Howard Storm, was a college professor and an art teacher and a militant atheist. And when he came back, he became a pastor in the United Church of Christ. So yeah, it changes people profoundly. And even people who just listen to NDEs are changed profoundly. Yeah.
One story I remember was a gentleman who he had said he wasn't a nice person. And when he had his NDE, he went back in his life review and experienced the way he was treating other people and how they felt about how he had treated them. He felt it from both perspectives. And from that point forward, he resolved himself to be much kinder and to go out of his way to be helpful to other people. And that one was one story that stuck out to me. I don't know, they give me a lot of comfort. They also, one thing I've noticed is listening to all of the NDE stories, it makes me long for heaven even more, I think. There was one gentleman who shared about how everybody has jobs in heaven. That's not everybody, but people can have jobs in heaven, but they're fun jobs. Like there's one lady there's a library in heaven, and you can go in and watch things from different timelines and see what happened. Like you can see the pyramids brand new. You can see like a Napoleon War. Whatever you want to see, you can go in and see. But there's a librarian there who works at the library in heaven. And so just really interesting stories that I love hearing about.
Yeah, I've heard about that. People being in that library. I wonder what the late fees are like. So you had mentioned the life review. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. The life review is really interesting because in this world, we're always one person, right? I'm me. I see through my eyes, hear through my ears, through my own senses. And in the life review, people report becoming every person they've ever interacted with, as if you were that person. You're seeing through their eyes, hearing through their ears. And so like one guy, he was in a fight. He was this big, tough guy. He was a bully. And he got in a fight with this pedestrian who illegally crossed the street in front of him, and he had to stop his truck. And so he gets out and he beats the guy up, 34 blows. So in his life review, there he is again, hitting the guy. At the same time, he is that guy. He feels his nose break and his teeth break, and he feels the embarrassment and the pain and all that. And then, of course, it works the other way, too. One guy who worked in hospice, caring for the elderly near end of life. And he said he got to his life review, and, some of these elderly people didn't have anybody that talked to them, no visitors. And he was the only one that kind of cared for him and was being kind and compassionate. And he said it was like emotional fireworks because he felt it from their perspective. They're suffering. And then this young guy comes in and he's trying to be nice and cheer them up. And so he felt all those good things. And so, yeah, what they learned from the life reviews is that every word we speak and every action we take with another human being has an effect, good or bad. And because we're all connected, when you harm someone else, you harm yourself. And when you help somebody else, you help yourself. And I hear near-death experiencers say things like, one person living in unconditional love is more powerful than millions living in fear. Bring hope or joy to one soul, and millions receive the vibration. One act of kindness ripples out and is felt by the whole earth. And so it makes me a little more aware and conscious that, I've got to be careful the way I interact with people and do my best to be kind and compassionate, especially when I'm in a bad mood or when my ego judges that person doesn't deserve my kindness.
And it creates, to me, I think, kind of a dance, because at you have to like validate, honor your own emotions that come up, and at the same time not put that burden on other people, and at the same time allow that to express itself, give it enough room to go through the process to complete itself. What I've learned is that our energy, it influences other people, and so we have to be responsible for the energy that we bring into a room. And but at the same time, I mean, I don't know, it's kind of a dance as far as to how to navigate life, because it goes out like a ripple and it comes back to you in the same form as how it goes out. And so what I wanted to ask you about, I wanted to ask about the perspective that you have heard as it relates to suffering. There's most of the people on this call are healing practitioners. And we help people in different ways, but like on my table, I see the effects that someone has had, say, for example, from abandonment, from sexual abuse as children, from neglect, things like that. All kinds of suffering that they're carrying from a difficult time. And so I was wondering what the perspective is from people who've had NDEs as it relates to why we have to endure so much suffering here on Earth.
Well, the answer is we don't have to. As a matter of fact, there have been people that were told in heaven, you never have to incarnate again. You don't have to go down there and do that. But Earth is like a fast learning school. So we don't come here to suffer. That is not the point. But suffering is part of the experience. So let's put it this way. I've got a nice, comfortable home here. I've got air conditioning and heating, and I got a nice lazy boy in front of a big screen TV, and it's very comfortable here. But if I want to grow, if I want to get stronger, if I want to exercise and strengthen my legs or heart or muscles, I have to go outside and run or lift weights or do something, and I'm going to suffer. And so suffering is part of the growth experience. And whenever you want to do something, you can do it slow. And people have been told this in their NDs. You can do it slow and sort of more comfortably, or you can do it fast, and then there's going to be suffering. So if I want to get from where I am to a mile away on foot, I can take a leisurely walk. It's going to take me 25 minutes, or I can run and I can get there in maybe 8 minutes, but I'm going to suffer. But it's not the purpose to suffer. If you ask the people who climb Mount Everest, why did you do it? Not one of them will say, well, I wanted to suffer. But they all knew that suffering was going to be part of it. And there are no victims. I mean, the people who climb Mount Everest, they know the risks. I mean, people die trying. And every soul before they come here, they know the potentials, they know the risks. And so there's no real victims. But we go through these experiences because when you experience the opposite of what you want, it strengthens what you want. And I have a story in my book called The King's Son that kind of describes a little bit. So there was once a king, and he was a benevolent king and was good to his subjects. And when his first son was born, that son grew up in the royal palace, and he had servants and slaves to obey his every command and, grant him his every wish. And because of that, he kind of grew up spoiled. He didn't really have much compassion for the people in the kingdom. Just kind of grew up selfish, because he never suffered. So when the king realized my first son is not, fit to be king. So when he had his second son, he brought that son to a family of poor farmers. And he said, you are to raise this child and never tell him that he is a prince and that he's going to be king. And so that child grew up on this farm and learned to rely on his brothers and sisters and worked long, hard hours of back-breaking labor. And sometimes the situation was bleak and they went without food. And it was when it was particularly bad, the king would send, his men in the night and leave food on their doorstep. The prince was never in any real danger, but he felt like he was in danger, just like here. We're not in real danger, but we feel like it. And when that child turned 18, the king came and said, you're going to be king. And that child went back to the young man went back to the royal palace, and he said please and thank you to his servants. And he was grateful for every, royal meal that he ate. And he became a benevolent king who cared genuinely about the well-being of the people in his kingdom, because he was one of them that struggled. And so somehow the suffering makes us better people. So we choose to go through these experiences, because when we get to the other side of the veil, everything negative that came from that gets washed away. Anger, resentment, emotional damage, that all just gets washed away. And all that's left is what is the good that we learned. And so Earth is an extremely tough, quick learning experience. It's the hardest planet in this galaxy to incarnate into. And yes, the galaxy's full of life. Many near-death experiences ask about that. And it's one of the most difficult planets in the entire universe. I think it's the third. I've heard that there are 2 planets more difficult. So, when people say, oh, why is life so difficult down here? Well, you chose the Mount Everest of physical incarnations. I mean, the people that are here are advanced daredevil souls. To the people on the other side of the veil, we're the courageous ones. I mean, they look at us like, you're going to separate from the love? You're going to forget? You're not going to hear the music anymore? You're going to feel disconnected? You're going to be in these frail bodies and in this hostile environment where you're going to suffer? You don't want to do that. The angels don't incarnate. No. So we're doing the universe real solid, though, because these physical incarnations and what we do down here is like the engine of growth for creation. We are partners in this big family business called the creation process. And we're on the outside of the fractal of God, causing the new growth. We're doing the universe real solid by being here. And by these physical incarnations, I have heard, and I don't understand it completely, we kind of hold the space for the love of heaven and creation to exist. So our jobs are very important. And like you, I'm looking forward to going home, but I realize the importance of life down here, and I'm going to try and make it as long and productive as possible. But when I think about death, it's something exciting. I'll be happy to go home.
I found it was interesting when you and I talked the other day that you said you had one other person who shared a story similar to the story I told you about, the angel that used to come to me with the hair that was like a mermaid that was glowing and alive. And then I heard an NDE story about someone described a river. And I had this practice that I would do, that it was just an intuitive practice, which I would call going to the river. And it was a river, a meditation I would go into, where I'd go into this river that was lined with healing crystals and stones and healing water, and allow it to just flow through me and just cleanse whatever it was that I had dealt with in that day. And then on one of the NDE podcasts, I heard someone talking about, you've got to go to the river. There's a place that you go to the river that just kind of, it's like has healing waters and cleans everything from this life that, so I've also heard some people describe it as it's just spontaneous. There's no, just spontaneous, how you just feel whole, and all of the pain and muck and burdens from this life there, you just don't feel it while you're there. And so I've heard that as well. What is your favorite NDE story?
Oh, first one I heard, Howard Storm. And I guess the reason is he had been this militant atheist all his life. You'll always see people like this. There's one in every company and one in every church. One of these people that's just, always intimidating and yelling and, always just, he walks in the room and, oh no, this guy again. And he was one of those. And, he didn't believe in the afterlife. And so I had watched this at a time when I had lost faith and thought, God doesn't care about me. And, he found himself in this hellish environment. When he called out to Jesus for help, Jesus came and got him. And he said that as they were going towards heaven, he saw this beautiful place of light and love and perfection. And he thought, they've made a mistake. That I don't belong there. He thought of himself like garbage, filth, scum, like I'm not worthy to be there. And they stopped, and they weren't in hell. They weren't in heaven. They were just kind of in between. And Jesus spoke to him and answered him, which kind of alarmed me. He's like, he can read my mind. And he said, we don't make mistakes. You belong here with us. And when he said those words, I realized, oh no, this guy was way worse than me. And if they love him, of course they're going to love me. And when he didn't know he was going to come back, so he asked several thousand questions. He was with Jesus and maybe 7 or 8 angels. And Jesus is not like the Jesus of the Bible. I mean, I've heard he's really wise. It's like talking to your best friend. He likes to joke around a lot. He's a really funny guy. Anyway, when they finally told him, well, you failed Earth, this was supposed to be a learning experience and you failed, and we're going to send you back, and you have to go back and live the way God wanted you to live. What they showed him basically in a nutshell is that when we are loving people, kind and considerate of others, it makes everybody in heaven happy. And that sometimes they cheer like at a football game when they see somebody do something good. The way we cheer at a football game, they, oh yeah, they're happy. You give a homeless guy a meal or something. And when we are selfish and cruel, manipulative, it makes them a little sad. And so they sent him back and they said, you got to live the way you were supposed to. And he argued with them. He says, no, I'm going to die from a broken heart, because, that love of heaven, I've heard about it so many times. People say things like, imagine the 100 happiest moments of your life and put all those into one moment. You don't come close. And one guy said, think of the strongest love you've ever felt, multiply it by about 500 or 1,000, and that's what you feel like there. And another person said, if you here on earth had a genie, like a magic lamp with a genie, and instead of 3 wishes, you had unlimited wishes, you could wish for anything you wanted that you can have on earth, you wouldn't be nearly as happy as you are there. So he's protesting, he says, if you send me back, I'm going to die of a broken heart, because you'll be up there and I'll be down here. And and they said to him, do you not get it? Do you not understand? We've been talking about all these things. We've been explaining all this to you. You've never been alone down there. We don't leave God's children alone down there. We're always there with you. You can't see us, but we're always right there by your side. We're holding your hand when you cry. We're laughing with you when you laugh. We're cheering with you when you achieve something you wanted to. We're helping you in unseen ways. You're never alone down there. And so that touched me in a really deep way.
Yeah. And a lot of these people who have NDEs, they talk about having 3 sets of guides. One of them is assigned to provide us with intuitive nudges and hits, but I don't know what the other 2 guides are assigned to, and I was wondering if you knew what those other 2 guides were.
No, I've never heard a category of 3 different guides. I know they have specialists. So if somebody's resentful, they'll send an angel who's a specialist in forgiveness or compassion, and they'll shine the emotion on you. And, that's not like mind control or something. You can always reject it, but they're pretty good at what they do. So normally the person responds. So for instance, one guy, he had a couple of near-death experiences when he was in hospice. He was dying. And he talked to these angelic beings around him. And he said, I'm very worried because I don't want to die without talking to my brother. We had a falling out, over 20 years ago, and he hasn't talked to me since then. And I want to patch things up before I go. And they said, oh, don't worry. We're sending a specialist in reconciliation, and he's going to, put the suggestion in your brother, and shine the emotion. And of course, sure enough, his brother came and saw him.
Oh.
So they send specialists, and then you'll have different amounts of angels. If everything's going great, you might only have 2 or 3 helping you at one time. And if you're going through something really difficult, you might have 10 or 15. But there are far more helpers on earth than there are human beings. They outnumber us by more than 2 to 1. I've heard that. Yeah.
Oh, wow. What would you say to what have NDE reports said in regards to suicide? Because from an energetic perspective, to me, what suicide is when the chakra system gets oversaturated with energy and they cannot metabolize anymore, and they're just they cannot, they're oversaturated with grief, with hurt, with aching that they just can't take not a single bit more. So why, if there are helpers on the other side, why do they allow people to get so desperate to the point of committing suicide?
Free will is the highest law of spirituality. So if a soul decides to disconnect completely from God, they are allowed to do that. Now, nobody gets left out in the cold forever. You know, when a soul's ready, they all come home, but you're occasionally always going to get the child that's mad, you know, at his mom. You're not my mommy, you know, denies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then a suicide, they're in such a negative state emotionally, their soul can bring that negativity in the afterlife, and souls kind of collect together. And so there isn't really a hell. I mean, there's just different environments created by the collective group of souls that are there, and they can get into these environments that are basically other souls that are very negative. But it's a temporary experience. Why they're not helped, I don't know. I think that every soul at some point wants to experience that, just to recognize the importance of connection. You know, it's almost like a condition that's as scary as possible to make us choose love and choose connection. Now, so there's something interesting about suicide. Some of them go to have a good experience in heaven, but most of them have negative afterlife experiences. And I've never heard the being of light. You know, people don't have to be told it's God. That it's like the universe reverberates name. But I never hear of anything but the most kind, loving, compassionate tone, voice, and all that, except when it comes to suicide. It's the only time I ever hear about the being of light speaking sternly. You know, you are not to decide when you die. It's a big no-no. And you take a bad problem and you make it worse by doing it. Why? It's, you know, they're lost for a while. I don't know. But I know there's a reason for it.
To me, like, people who are suffering from addiction, a lot of them are self-medicating because their emotions related to a painful life story are too hard to feel. And so they self-medicate with alcohol or drugs or whatever it is that shuts down that sensitivity, that they're able to check out temporarily, and they need some kind of relief from the reminder of a painful past. And so I think that's one of the things that's hardest for me, is because I see people who are struggling with different degrees of suffering. I have clients come in who are adults with scars from child abuse, and just really, really big, huge, painful stories. And whether they're 60 or 12, they're struggling with it. And this is, I understand what you're saying. I'm just a little conflicted about this. So please tell me whatever you want to say. When you love somebody, you want to help them. And if you could lighten the load for them, you would. But here there are spirits on the other side. And why do they hold back their help? Why do they hold back their hand to do anything to intervene for us, so that it's just such I don't know, I'm a little bit at odds with that. I understand what you're saying about the need for growth. And I had one one of my first spiritual teachers, when I was complaining to her about something that was really, really hard. And she looked at me and she said, at a soul level, you chose this. You came into this life.
Mhm.
You had this, and this you had agreed to, you were going to go through. You chose this. So you should just forgive them and just get on with it, get on with your life. And I looked at her and I told her, there is no way in hell I would have ever chosen this, and this. And she was like, she was really firm about it. No, you chose this. This was written in your plan. You chose this. So um I understand that now better, but it's just the suffering part and how I see people suffer and how they can be so, there's so much grief related to painful stories that I witness with clients going through a healing process. And it's just, for me, it's hard to watch. And I do this process because I can. I know how to work with that energy, but it's painful even to be a witness to that. And how do the other people on the other side, the spirit guides and the ascended masters, look on without extending a helping hand? I don't know, that just is hard for me to come to terms with.
Goes back to free will. So you kind of hit the nail on the head. Anything huge like that, a person who's been abused, any big life event, you've done the pre-soul planning for that. So that the pre-soul planning, there's all the major events, and then the minor details you fill in. And it's just like a vacation itinerary. You can deviate from the itinerary if you want, but most people don't. It's pretty rare you plan on going to Paris and you get there and say, I don't like this place. I'm going to Tahiti. That happens, but it's pretty rare. People usually stick to the plan. And it's voluntary. You know, imagine if you found yourself on Mount Everest with no memory of what happened before. And you're like, and somebody said, you wanted to be here. Well, you know, you, and then you find out later, well, yeah, I chose to climb up there and then have amnesia. We chose to come down here and have amnesia. And that's part of what makes it difficult. So there's no, there's no rule saying we have to suffer. This is a choice by souls, because when we choose the most difficult lives, and the people who chose the most difficult lives down here, the ones who are abused and that kind of thing, or go through a lot of trauma, those are the more advanced souls. It's in our moments when we're suffering, when we're growing the most. If you want a huge leap in consciousness, a huge leap in love, a huge growth in the fractal of God, there's going to be suffering attached to that. So again, you can do things slowly through time or quickly through suffering. And people are even shown this in heaven. One guy, I can't remember the disease he had, but he was confined to a wheelchair all his life. He had breathing problems. And one day when he was 35 years old, he had a severe breathing attack and he died. And the paramedics came and they revived him. And he was up in heaven. Now, he had been a Christian man and very dedicated to God and, very good his whole life, and very few, bad things in his life review. And he asked, he says, well, why have I been punished with this disease? I mean, I've been so good. I've done my best to be the best person I can be and always be loving and kind and forgiving. And why have I been punished with this? And they said to him, you don't remember? Well, here, let us show you this. So the way they teach you things there is they show you. They don't give you a verbal explanation. They show you. So they took him back and they showed him this 3D holographic recording of him in a classroom with other souls preparing to come to Earth. And the instructor's up there and the instructor is saying, all right, there are two ways to do things. You can learn your lessons slowly, through a long period of time, or very quickly through suffering. And then he wrote the name of the guy's disease on the board, something that kind of looked like a chalkboard. And he said, now this is a very painful disease, but you're going to learn a lot very quickly and you'll grow a lot. Are there any volunteers? And he says he saw himself and he remembered thinking, oh, I should do this. Well, I don't know, though. I don't even know what pain is. And
Wow.
he chose to do it. So he went from seeing himself as a victim after that to somebody who took on a challenge. And the reason they don't help us more are twofold. I've heard that they are often restricted from giving us too much help. There's a certain amount of help they give us. To get more help, we have to ask. And it goes back to that free will thing. And they can't give us too much. They're restricted by the creator because, if you help your child a little bit with homework, he's going to learn. If you help him too much and you do his homework for him, he's not going to learn. They make it too easy. And remember, you have to be a mature soul to come down here to earth. And so it's the best of the best of the best that come here that can handle it. You don't send a child that just learned how to walk, 2-year-old on a trek up Mount Everest. He's going to die. So you've got to be experienced to do these lifetimes down here. Not only that, it's such a huge learning experience and such a huge growth experience. There's a lot of souls that want to incarnate to earth. But for every 100 souls, there's only one body. And so not only are the souls that qualify for earth the best of the best of the best, they take like the top 1%, and those are the ones that are here. And then out of those ones that are here, the ones that are suffering the most are the best of those. So yeah, when you're at that level of expertise, there's going to be challenges, and there's going to be suffering, and there's going to be difficult things. You don't run a triathlon without suffering. It's just the nature of things.
It's interesting. I'm still curious how it works, because I remember early on I had one person come to see me for a session, and I wasn't finding anything in her field. I did find something eventually, but it was just really minor. And I asked her, I said, "Why are you here? I can't find anything." And she was almost ashamed. She's like, "I know, I've had a really good life. I've been really fortunate. Both of my parents were great. I was nurtured. I was loved. I've always been supported. I never wanted for anything." And she said, "I just wanted to see what this was like," is what she told me. So it's more of a rarity to me of people who've had an easier time rather than people who've had a difficult time. And I remember when I first started doing this, I told you I had a really painful upbringing and had this, I just felt like I had this, like, how do I put it? I owned the worst story that anybody ever had, is what I felt like. And then I started working with clients, and I was really ashamed of myself because I found people with stories that were more painful than my own, more difficult than my own. And here I had been feeling sorry for myself, and come to find out most people are struggling with something that they really can't talk about, or don't feel like they could share openly, and are just really carrying really heavy burdens. But it seems like it's more of a rarity for people who have like easy, just kind of go with the flow, Hakuna Matata kind of lives.
Well, yeah, and in the big scheme of things, you got to back up and look at the big picture when we talk about suffering and difficult lives. When you're having a dream or a nightmare, you believe it's real. You don't have any memory of the real world. You're in that nightmare 100%. You believe it's real. And then when you wake up, you realize, oh, this is the real world. That was just a dream. I was never any in real danger. I just thought I was. Well, it's the same when we leave our bodies and go back home. It's like taking one level up to the next level of consciousness. You feel more alive, more real than you've ever felt in your life, filled up with life. And for people who are in older, broken down bodies, they are young and pain-free, and you feel great. And you go, oh, this is the real world. And all that stuff that happened on earth, all that seems so traumatic, it's just like waking up from a dream. And you go, oh, that was only a dream. Oh, I'm back home in my bed and safe. And that's how it is when we go home. It doesn't matter how bad it is here. I mean, it may not be pleasant going through it. I've had some nightmares that are not pleasant, but we're going to wake up and go, oh, that was nothing. I'm fine. I was always fine. Yeah, that's how it is.
One thing I think is really great that I hear consistently among all the NDE stories is that in heaven, everybody looks like the very best version of themselves. They're like in their early 30s?
Yeah, I started hearing that right away. I remember one lady, she says, "Well, I saw my grandmother there, but it didn't look like her." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" She says, "Well, my grandmother was, old and hunched over and had wrinkled skin and no teeth and, gray hair. And I saw her in heaven, and she was this beautiful 30-year-old woman, and she smiled, full set of white teeth, and she had long black hair. And even one little girl, she was 7 years old. She died of a high fever. And her brother, who had died in Vietnam when he was 17, was there to greet her and brought her, kind of guided her through the tunnel. And she noticed there were other souls traveling through the tunnel towards the light. And some of them had this calm excitement like her, like, "Oh, wow, this is really awesome." And others were, for lack of a better term, dancing, just ecstatic, like, "What?" And she said to her brother, "What's up with those guys?" And he told her, "Oh, that those were elderly people who had been trapped for many years and in painful, broken down bodies, and they are just overjoyed to be young and healthy again." Yeah. Now you can appear any way you want in heaven, but people generally choose to appear as the best version of themselves on earth. And the higher levels, you're just kind of this sphere of consciousness and energy. But on the lower levels, you have a light body. And one guy, even his favorite biblical figure was Peter, the hot-headed apostle. And so, they'll often create an experience to make the near-death experiencer feel comfortable. So, if you like nature, they'll bring you into a garden. If you're close to your grandmother who died, recently, grandma will meet you there. Well, he liked Peter, and Peter probably appeared the way he did on earth, like a fisherman. So he says, "Yeah, I saw Peter in heaven. He was a bit shaggy looking," which I thought was hilarious.
I remember you saying that. So, okay, so this sounds like a totally silly question, but I wanted to ask it. I am wondering if in heaven, like, say, for example, in this life, you really wanted to be like a professional basketball player or a ice skater or whatever it is. Are you able to do that in heaven?
You can if you want, but I rarely hear of that kind of thing because the activities there are just so much more amazing and indescribable. I mean, I heard about people going to other dimensions. One lady got taken back to the beginning of time and shown when the universe was created, and people were shown alien civilizations or ancient cultures here on Earth. And it's just you're not going to want to ice skate when when you can do such. You're not going to want to listen to the radio when you can be in a giant room with a symphony. you know.
Oh, yeah.
So, but they
I
have activities up there. They play games and things. There's games they play. There's one game where they'll line up and then you run through each other. And as you run through each other, you like momentarily experience that other person. It's
oh,
kind of like Red
wow.
Rover, but you don't trap anybody. They run through each other.
Oh,
And
wow.
it's just kind of crazy and fun. And yeah, and there's whole uninhabited planets where the souls will go there to play and frolic. And you made a good point earlier. You said that people have jobs there, which they do, but we have this division between work and play. I don't like my job. I wouldn't do that if I were a billionaire. I wouldn't volunteer to do that. Well, your job in heaven is what you're really good at and what you love to do. So the line between work and play is really blurred. You're doing what you love to do. And
Yeah.
people report being very busy. They also have times where they relax and things like that, but they're usually, they report being very busy and not in a stressful way. The kind of busy like oh, I'm going to Europe. I'm taking a tour of Europe, and you make a list of all the things you want to do, and you're really busy, but it's an exciting kind of busy. Oh, I got to see the Great Pyramids of Giza, and I got to see the Eiffel Tower, and I got to see the Colosseum in Rome, and you got the long list, that kind of busy, a good busy.
So I want to know, does the weight of grief from losing somebody, does that weigh on somebody in heaven in a way that keeps them from resting in peace?
Do you mean our grief for those that are
Yep.
in heaven?
For our grief here from losing somebody, does that weigh on somebody in heaven in a way that prevents them from resting in peace?
No, no, you feel great up there. And when you see pain or suffering down here, you might want it want to do something about it or hope that the person gets through it. But there's no real negative emotions up there. That doesn't exist up there. It's all positive. Yeah. You can they report feeling like, when they have hopes that we do something. So they don't really even have expectations. So the creative, benevolent source of all life and all those in heaven, they don't have anger or judgment or even expectation. They have hope. They want us to make choices where we have a good life and accomplish our goals and do the things we want. And it's just like your kid, when he's trying to learn something new and he fails, you go, oh, well, try again, sweetie, that kind of thing. But it's not really like being sad or anything. And they're patient and they can see what we can't see. And every soul, no matter what path they take or how long, is always going to grow, and the growing never ends. It's the fractal of creation never stops growing. And then we can see evidence of that just in our own physical universe of how big it is, because all that is part of a growth process, right? The Big Bang and all that. So think about how big the universe is. If you're traveling at the speed of light, that's around the Earth 7 times in 1 second. Now, there is a pinpoint of light in our universe we call the Milky Way galaxy, several hundred billion stars, but just a pinpoint in our known universe. So to go across that pinpoint from one side to the other, you would have to travel at that tremendous speed of light all day, every day, for 24 hours a day for your whole lifetime, and then repeat that for 1,200 lifetimes just across the pinpoint of light we call the Milky Way galaxy. And there are billions and billions of galaxies. And one guy, people talked about it, but only one guy described seeing it. He saw our entire universe in the super universe, because near-death experiences are told there are other dimensions, countless other dimensions containing other universes that are also full of life. And he said our entire universe was a pinpoint in the super universe. So it's been going on for a while. We've got we got a lot of brothers and sisters. We've got a big family.
Yeah, I have one client who had an NDE, and they said that everybody on Earth is from other planets and other galaxies, that we're all like, it's a mishmash of people from other planets and galaxies, other alien races, so to speak. And I was wondering if anybody has mentioned anything about bloodlines, because I was wondering, do our bloodlines indicate like what race we belong to, what spiritual, what galaxy we came from? Or I don't know if that's a weird question, but I was curious about that, because bloodlines are something that the Chinese people, like when you apply for a job, they want to know what your blood type is, because blood types have similarities and different characteristics. So I was curious if in NDEs, if they mention anything about bloodlines.
I don't have much information about that. I've heard very little about that. But what I have heard is that through the long history of Earth, alien races have come by and visited. They've interacted and intermixed genetically in various ways. I've even heard about one race that tweaked our genetics to kind of try and use us as slaves and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, we've got alien DNA. And then, of course, in terms of incarnating, you don't start out on planet Earth. You start out like the 2-year-old taking a few steps, and you have to have a planet like the Pleiades or the Arcturians, where they've already achieved peace on their planet and they're living in these utopian societies, very spiritual. And, you start off with an easy life and then you take on more and more challenges. And so it's like almost the opposite. The most advanced driver can drive a really bad car in terrible condition without wrecking it. The brakes are bad, steering's loose. Whereas a brand new driver can't drive that old car. So, brand new driver needs a perfect car in great condition. So new souls need a planet that's kind of, they're not fighting each other. There's not a lot of negativity and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we talked about, you touched on that. So I'm sorry to repeat that question, but I don't know, it's something I wanted to include in here. Someone is asking, Karen is asking, what would you tell someone who is afraid of dying?
Well, I mean, I would say that dying is as easy as waking up from a dream. You know, we're always scared of doing things that are unknown. Uh, well, I hesitate whether I should tell this story or not. All right. Well, when I was younger, in my younger and foolish days, I decided to try LSD,
Okay.
and I was terrified. And I had this friend who had, he's kind of a old hippie, and he had taken it, I don't know, 150 times or so, and I was just really nervous about it. And when I took it, I took a light dose. I didn't do anything where I hallucinated or anything. I took a very light dose, but it was a very pleasant feeling. And I went, I was afraid of this, and there's how many times does that happen as a human being? We're afraid of. I remember when I was a kid, I was afraid to eat pudding because it looked like excrement, you know, and my mom finally got it in my mouth. And, oh my God. So, that's always happening. We're always afraid of the unknown, but death is actually a lot easier than birth. Coming down here, that's tough. That's
Yeah.
unpleasant. Yeah, but
I heard
death is easy.
I heard one person giving an account of their near-death experience, and she talked about how the lights were so beautiful, the colors were so beautiful, and the angels were singing around her. And she talked about it being such a beautiful experience. She said she loved the sound of dying, that it was just such a profoundly beautiful experience, and also being able to feel that unconditional love that people talk about experiencing when they have an NDE. I don't know if I mentioned this in our conversation, but a few years ago, my son, he flew me out to Maui, which is somewhere I always wanted to go to Hawaii, and went to this place called Kula that is up in the foothills, and you can see both sides of the ocean. And at one point, it was towards sunset. You could see the sun setting, and there were these clouds with light shooting through. And there was this beautiful tree with a garden there. And I thought, boy, this must be what it's like in heaven. And then when I went back to my desk job, I remember having this really very real sense of depression. Like when I was in Hawaii, everyone looked happy. Even the guy that was working at the gas station looked happy. And I thought, wow, there's people that are really just in a happy place, living a happy life in a paradise. And I just had this depression, like I just wanted to go back. And I told people, I feel like I got a glimpse of heaven and was told that I wasn't allowed to stay. So I've longed to have an NDE for myself, but I think if I do, I'd be terribly depressed because I wouldn't be allowed to stay.
A lot
So
of people get very depressed. It's hard to experience pure perfection and happiness and then come back to this place. And, you mentioned, for instance, just something as simple as the colors of heaven. Now we have three primary colors: red, yellow, and blue. And a mixture of those three colors make up every color in the rainbow, every color we see here on earth. So one man said, when he was in the first level of heaven, sort of the in-between place that's kind of laid out like earth, he said there were over 80 primary colors. So just the colors are mind-boggling. And of course, you don't have a blind spot. So like right about here, your vision goes away. Now you can see all around, 180 degrees.
and something people don't understand is that our ears and our eyes, they have a very narrow capacity to perceive color and sound. So just like how a dog whistle, you can't hear it with the human ear, but a dog can hear it. There are just an infinite amount of potentials for colors and for sound and for frequencies and vibration.
Oh yeah. Let's see if I can pull it up here. Can I share my screen real quick and show you something?
Absolutely. I'm
Will
sorry, I'm
that work?
plugging in my computer. It's running low. Go ahead.
All right, here we go. Share screen. There we go. So you can see this is the spectrum of light that we know of. And this is what Diane was just talking about. This little sliver right here is visible light. So that'll give you an idea of probably what's going on there. We can probably see all the spectrums of light. That's my guess. All right, how do I stop sharing?
And so what my understanding of
There we
things
go.
like psychics is that their capacity is wider than that spectrum as far as clairaudience, clairsentience. Their perception capacity is wider than that very thin sliver.
Yeah, so what actually is happening is we're all connected to universal consciousness, and near-death experiencers have described this. They merge with the being of light and they say, well, I knew everything. I was part of God. I didn't have any questions. I had all the answers. Well, we're all connected to that. So, but what we have to do when a little piece of God separates and incarnates into a body and becomes the human being, we have the illusion of separateness. And part of that's amnesia. And so when we have that illusion of separateness, it's what allows us to have experiences to grow.
The other thing I wanted to mention, speaking to that narrow capacity, one thing that I've have found, like whenever I have a client on my treatment table who has had a near-death experience, their energy fields are different. I use a pendulum to tell me where there's stagnation in the field, if the chakra is blocked or overperforming or underperforming. But people who have had an NDE, their energy is different. It's higher. The pendulum, it's like a helicopter wheel all the way around their body. And
Wow.
it's consistently 100% of the time. It's almost like, of what it means to me, it's almost like their frequency is elevated, and it never goes back to how they were before their NDE. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I have found it consistently on people who have had NDEs.
That's the first time I've heard that, but I'm not surprised because people come back and they talk about being infused with this love from heaven. One guy, Gordon Allen, he came back and said, my heart was on fire with love and it stayed with me. It's in me. And so people are infused with this, divine energy, and it's higher vibration, higher frequency, which are the higher levels of consciousness. So yeah, it's a real boost in consciousness. And it's generally when somebody has a near-death experience, that's something that's planned in the pre-soul planning. And it's a daring thing to do because you become a huge generator of light and love on this planet, much bigger than before the ND, but it also makes it difficult because you remember that light and love and you long to go back, and it can make doing your job down here difficult. So only select souls will take on that daring task to have an NDE that they remember. And then of course, some it's just incidental. It wasn't planned and it happens, and they're always helped. But yeah, everybody who goes to heaven, they're infused with this energy. And of course, as you know, the energy of the soul projects onto the physical body like a projector, like the old projectors onto a movie screen. And so if the film is healthy, the image will be healthy. And when they come back, they'll often have very rapid physical recovery or spontaneous remission of whatever was causing the NDE in the first place. And doctors are aware of it. They give it a name to dismiss its importance. They call it spontaneous remission or spontaneous recovery, but it's basically the soul being in great balance with great energy, and it quickly manifests in the physical and heals them quite rapidly in many cases. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And we touched on this the other day with our talk. People who have had NDEs, they always describe feeling so constricted when they have to fit back into their body, right? And to me, what the aura
Yes.
is that it's an extension, that we are so vast and so great and so expansive that the aura is part of our soul that can't fit into this body, can't be contained within this suit that we're in.
Yeah, and I've heard people say that. They say when they come out of their body, it's like taking off this old, restrictive, heavy winter coat. And you feel free and light for the first time in your life. And some people don't want to go back in. Pam Reynolds had a brain aneurysm, and her lifeless body was there after the operation. Her uncle brought her back, says, "Well, you got to go back." And she goes, "I ain't going back in that thing." And her uncle pushed her.
Oh, wow.
And she was mad at him for a long time for doing that. But some people, it's interesting you said that about the soul, like fitting in the body. Yeah, because we fit as much energy into the body as we can, and none of us are all here. If a soul has developed to the point where they can handle an earthly life, the difficult earthly life, they're big, for lack of a better, I mean, there's no dimensions really in heaven, but they're a lot. They're developed. And so if you were to take the entire soul and try and put it in a human body, it would burn up. So only a piece of us separates and comes down here. And of course, you hear the language, my higher self, and all that. And some people, when they have their near-death experiences, a friend of mine, Christian Anderson, he died in a dentist chair. He took Vicodin and then they put him under, and he died, and they had defibrillators there. They revived him. So he was brought by his angelic guy. He says, "I'd like you to meet somebody." And he sees this huge, powerful being. And he says, "Oh my gosh, is that God?" He says, no, that's not God. That's you. That's your higher self. God's a lot bigger than that. He mistook his higher self for God. I mean,
Wow.
yeah, that's how big the is, or expansive we are on the other side of the veil. And the language is here already. My higher self. You know,
Karen is using the example
chat.
of pantyhose and being in
Oh, there
pantyhose.
you go.
Karen, I was actually going to use the example of a bra. Like if you were a woman, you would know what I'm talking about. The first thing you take off when you get home. So that's funny. So are there any other stories that stand out more than others as far as the NDEs, like interesting or beautiful?
Sure. There was one in particular where this woman was taken through heaven, and she described a lot of things. So there's not really levels of heaven any more than there's levels of love. How many levels of love do you have for your child? Well, now it's this soup of different kinds of love. But there are environments created by the collective group of souls that are there. And this environment was sort of like a stepping stone for souls who are trying to get used to the afterlife. You can't just run to the highest dimensions. You've got to take it slowly. So it's kind of laid out like Earth. And there's roads and buildings and gardens and trees that are larger than our tallest redwoods and giant sequoias, and rivers and lakes and mountains and everything you can imagine, and buildings. And she described it, and it was pretty neat. Like she grabbed a peach, something that kind of looked like a peach, and it was much tastier. And she ate it. And she was with her brother who had died before her. And says, "Well, where do I throw this away?" He says, "Just throw it on the ground." Well, the place was immaculate. There's just no trash. Everything's immaculate. She says, "I can't do that." She says, "Just do it." So she throws it on the ground. It just dissolved into the grass. The
Oh,
whole place
wow.
is self-cleaning. And they talked about, the giant trees. She walked through a river. They got to a river and says, "Well, how do you want to cross? We can fly over it, or we can just think about being on the other side and we'll be there, or we can walk under." She says, "Well, let's walk under it." So she could breathe under the water, or she didn't need to breathe. I don't know which. And then when it came out the other side, her clothes was dry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they've described gardens. So one lady said, "I saw this garden in heaven, like this beautiful park." And I said, "Like what? Like Yosemite National Park?" And for those of you who might not know, Yosemite is a famous national park in California. People come from all over the world to see it. It's one of the most beautiful places on earth. And this lady says, maybe 100 times more beautiful than Yosemite. There's
Wow.
flowers that glow with their own light and sing,
Wow.
and everything emits its own light. So they have giant cathedrals. This woman, this one experience, she saw this giant cathedral, and it had crystals that glowed with their own light. And she goes, "Oh, you guys are copying us, because that kind of looks like stained glass." And they laughed and they said, "No, no, no. Human beings are aware at some subconscious level what the cathedrals in heaven look like." So they try and copy them. And we don't have crystals that glow with their own light. The closest thing we have is stained glass, which looks kind of like it's glowing. So we try and copy them, you know. But yeah, that was an interesting testimony. And then I kind of like a few where they were shown the future Earth, which I found those the most encouraging. I've maybe only heard, I want to say 5 to 10 testimonies where they were shown details of the future Earth. And when you survey the world today, it seems like everything's falling apart. It just looks like we're going to hell in a handbasket, and
Yeah.
nothing could be further from the truth. It's just we're going through a tumultuous change, and we're not gonna destroy ourselves. There's gonna be some more large wars, but there's not gonna be a world war where every continent in the world's involved. And we're eventually going to get to a point where peace on earth is the first step. And then once we stop fighting each other, well, then we really get moving. And then we'll have interstellar contact, and we'll develop psychic abilities, and we'll develop technologically and spiritually, and we'll live in this kind of utopian society where we live in harmony with each other and nature. And of course, then our job will be to seed life on another planet and help them get started the way the Pleiadians are kind of watching over us. They're our cosmic parents. So we have an exciting future. And that probably, I really like those testimonies because a lot of people have negative views of the future, but we really have a bright future. The dance of consciousness is always one of 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And you don't have to have much of a brain to see we're in a step back phase right now, but it's only a matter of time before we blast forward again. We had a blast forward in the 60s with the original flower children, not the mainstream hippies, the original flower children. They didn't care about race. They wanted to live naturally and eat organic foods and, reduce materialism. And we'll have another blast forward in consciousness. And
Um,
it'll be accepted this time.
yeah, even since I spoke to you the other day, David and I were having this conversation about being able to feel and sensing a shift coming on. I've talked to multiple people, and they, without me asking, have mentioned the same thing, like feeling like this really intense, elevated sense of feeling this change that's coming. So for those of you who don't know right now, today, March 18th, Pluto's getting ready to do a temporary shift from, it's in the last degrees of Capricorn and moving into the early degrees of Aquarius. Capricorn ruling things like governments, NATO, big banks. And so it's going to be some type of a death and rebirth on some level, both collectively and personally, depending on how that lands in your chart. But yeah, I was really, I'm always glad to hear, like, when someone tells me, oh, you feel it too, which is exactly what you said to me the other day when we spoke. Because I've had other people tell me the same thing, that they really feel that there's just this huge shift coming. And when you don't know what it is, if you're someone like me, I have a lot of fixed energy in my chart, and I have this like brace for impact kind of a sensation that I'm feeling. Yeah, I definitely feel some big change coming.
Yeah, we're in the Great Awakening. I have heard many times this is one of the most exciting times to be alive. We're getting close towards meeting our goal and becoming an ascended species. And that doesn't mean we're all going to be holding hands, singing kumbaya, and there's never going to be any disagreements. But we will be like worldwide, we will be like a very loving, close knit family. Yeah, they're going to have their disagreements and arguments, but the brothers and sisters aren't going to pick up guns and knives and start killing each other. That's going to be over with. And so we're going to all be focused kind of on the same goal. We're going to be able to communicate with plants and tell them how and where to grow. We'll control the Earth's temperature through our consciousness. Where there won't be doctors. When a member of the community is sick, the other members will gather around, and using the power of thought, will heal them. Now, we have that ability now. It's within us. Just like a child has the ability to ride a bike. He's just got to learn how to do it. And that's coming, but we're not ready for those gifts yet. They would be abused if we had them today.
Is
You
there,
can't give a child a knife. You can't give a 2-year-old a knife. Well, when he's 20 and he's learning how to cook, well, then you give him a knife. He ain't ready for it yet.
yeah, I heard someone say you can't feed a baby a steak. Um,
Now,
is there anything in any of the NDEs that you've interviewed? Do any of them talk about things that some of us are hearing about, things like med beds? Have you heard anything about med beds?
Yes, but not much. So we've kind of messed up our genetics, and the GMOs are doing damage. So for those of you who don't know, it's genetically modified organisms. They basically, Monsanto, everybody thinks that, the scientists tweak the food and, we tweak the genes. We tweaked every little part to make this corn resistant to bugs and resistant to pestilence. And no, they don't know what they're doing. They took a virus they found living in their chemical dump of Roundup, which is supposed to kill everything. It's an herbicide, pesticide. And they took that virus and they just shot that gene into a bunch of seeds. And then they grew them all. And, oh, this one's got the characteristics we want. Well, the word from the other side of the veil is GMOs are going to make us sterile in 3 generations. Luckily, they're illegal in over 80 countries. And so it's not going to extinguish humanity, but they're really bad for us, causing all sorts of problems. They're messing up our genetics. And I hear these beds is what I've heard, very spotty information. Don't put any faith in this, but these beds can kind of fix our genetics. And then if it's true that our genetics were messed with in the past by an alien race who was trying to use us like slaves, they can fix that as well. And what's happening is we only have 23 chromosomes and many of the animals have 24. Well, that disconnects us from our intuition, which is why animals are far more intuitive than we are. I sit with my cat outside and she knows when a storm's coming before the weather does. And she knows when there's animals near before I do. I'll hear her
Well,
growl.
the work of Sol Luckman, he does something called the regenetic methods. He talks about a kind of a block that's put in between the second and third chakra that prevents the energy from moving up, prevents Kundalini activation from taking place. And so he offers a process called repotentiation that helps to clear that blockage and allows that activation of the Kundalini. It's a book called Repotentiate Your DNA. And if you're interested, David, I know somebody who's a practitioner who's a dear friend of mine and is pretty amazing. So if you're interested in that. But yeah, speaking to the modified food, I had a really amazing biology teacher in college. He talked about how people believe, like, when you have a headache, you take an aspirin and you just assume it goes only to the place where that pain is located and just relieves the pain. When you ingest something, it goes into every single cell of your body. You assimilate it. Yeah. So all of that GMO food, we're taking that into every single cell of our body, and it's affecting us. So yeah, it is illegal in a lot of countries. Austria for sure, they don't allow it there. And
one of the things I've heard, I'm sorry, go on.
No, you go on. You go on.
One of the things I've heard from the other side of the veil, for instance, is that one of the things that's going to be revealed in the future is that pharmaceutical companies are knowingly keeping people sick for profit. And that they are either there'll be a combination of pharmaceutical companies failing or very quickly changing to stop that behavior so they can survive. Yeah. Well, so we're getting bombarded everywhere. You know what the Pleiadians call Wi-Fi? They call it we-fry. It's really bad for our brains and our consciousness. They say, turn off the Wi-Fi. Don't sit next to a Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I don't know why, but we have a long history of this. When radium was discovered, 120 years ago, they thought, oh, anything so energetic must be good for us. And so they were putting radium in food products, in butter and makeup and toothpaste. Of course, people are getting radiation poisoning. We have a long history of that. Yeah. Thinking that we know what we're doing. No, we don't know. We're very primitive still. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Interesting.
But we'll learn. And there's no damage that can't be undone. I've even heard that in the future, they're going to attack the big patch of garbage in the Pacific Ocean, and that's going to get cleaned up. And they're going to get rid of GMOs, and it'll take a long time to track them down and get them out of our food system. And they're going to get rid of those, and we're going to clean up the air and the soil and the water and Earth. The people who have seen the future Earth say it's really pristine. I mean, blue sky, fresh air. I mean, it's a notable difference. You know, Gaia is suffering with us right now. We're like the badly behaved 2-year-old of the planet, you know, and Gaia's just kind of putting up with us while we mature. And it's going to
Yeah.
take a while. But I have also heard that she's much stronger than our scientists believe, and that short of a nuclear war, which is not going to happen, there is no damage that we can do that she can't heal. And I'll give you just a scientific background on that. There was a show on the History Channel called After Man or something like that, or After People. And they say, well, what would happen if people disappeared? Well, the bottom line is in 100,000 years, you would see no evidence that there was mankind there. The Earth would be pristine. 100,000 years. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old. That, if you put that 4.6 billion years into a human life, that's less than one day. In one day, Gaia heals. And we saw evidence of that during COVID, didn't we? They were shocked at how fast, you know, environments started cleaning up. The people in India that couldn't see the Himalaya mountains from 30 miles away saw it for the first time in decades. And we saw it happen. So once we get our act together and we start cooperating with Mother Nature and stop polluting the air and the water and the soil, it's going to clean up real fast. We're going to get a lot of help, and we're going to get a lot of young people coming in with new ideas of things that the old generation didn't think of. Yeah, it's going to be an exciting time.
Yeah, it's a show called Life After People.
Is that it? Life After People.
Yeah,
Thank you. I
Life
couldn't
After
remember it.
People. What do they say? What do NDEers say in regards to our current financial system?
Oh boy. I heard a testimony back in 2013. Well, first of all, the first testimony I ever heard, Howard Storm, was shown that the United States debt would go up and up and up, and eventually we would default. And I'm seeing it accelerate now and get nervous. And I heard a testimony back in 2013, and she said, by the beginning of 2024, with the world banking system on the verge of collapse, they're going to institute a worldwide cryptocurrency. Now, back in 2013, cryptocurrency was pretty new.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to eliminate cash. And I'm now seeing the beginnings of bank failures, and it's making me a little nervous. But at the same time, I know that many light workers, they may struggle, but we're being protected. You know, I believe we're being protected. And so whenever I get nervous about it, my guides tell me, relax, you're going to be okay. Yes, there's going to be chaos. Yes, there's going to be struggles, but it's not going to be end of the world type stuff. You know, there's just going to be a lot of big headaches and inconveniences and financial chaos, and we'll get through it.
I think it's, you know, the Bible talks about the end times and describes it like birth pains. And in order for death to happen and rebirth, it doesn't, things don't change in a way that's usually organized and orderly. There is chaos, and it's not pretty, and usually not easy and harmonious. Great change usually is preceded by great chaos and great, you know, disorderly events. So, and
when the house that your family has been living in for generations, a giant mansion, your extended family has lived in this house for generations, it served you well, but now the roof is leaking and the wood is rotten and the plumbing is bad and the electrical's faulty and you just can't patch it up anymore. If you're the 5-year-old kid and mom and dad don't tell you what's going on, the day the bulldozer, you know, if you can't see what's coming, like we can't, the day the bulldozers come and knock the house down and make way for a new one, that's going to feel like the end of the world. And we have a corporate banking
system,
government oligarchy, and they are all for the most part, acting in darkness, in selfishness, very low vibration. They do not have the people's best interests in mind. And so those systems are going to have to crumble. And as they crumble, some will change and continue, and some will fail. And we're seeing the beginnings of that now. People losing faith in government, faith in the financial systems. And I think that's going to happen.
Okay. Anything else that stands out to you in regards to the NDE stories that you've heard? What's the commonality and what is the most uncommon? I don't know if that's a weird question.
Uncommon. The most uncommon. I'd have to think about that one. Let's talk about the commonalities. The most common thing is love. When people come back, they seem to understand or believe, and I believe them, that it's all about love. Heaven is not concerned about sexuality, choice of religion, career, goals, accomplishments. They don't care about any of that. All they care about is, are we loving to ourselves and others and the planet? They want us to love the way a 3-year-old child does. Just an innocent love, quick to forgive, open, and it's hard. That's a tough one for me. And nothing's more meaningful to those on the other side of the veil than when we are purposely kind, especially to those we consider our enemies, or the ones that our ego says, this person's being a jerk. They're clearly in the wrong. I haven't done anything. They don't deserve my kindness. Well, I hear messages over and over again from heaven, like, it's more important to be loving than it is to be right. Every little act of kindness, every tiny little deed becomes a pillar of beauty in this life and the one to come. I mean, energetically, a pillar of beauty. And there's this ripple effect. When you are kind to just one person and you shift them just a little bit, they go out and they're a little better and they're a little kinder. And that's how the world gets changed. Having a meeting like this that you've set up, or a practice that you have, or writing a book, or doing a movie about spirituality, those are all wonderful things. You reach a lot of people, but it's not necessary. The way people show up every single day, the way we show up in the world, even by the way we greet each other, it's so important. Mother Teresa said, always greet one another with a smile, because a smile is the beginning of love. And I like to tell people, you don't need to know a single thing that I have written in my book or any other spiritual book. Children operate in unconditional love without having an ounce of spiritual knowledge. And it just takes this innocent view of the world. I'm not going to be upset about what that person did to me yesterday. This is today. Now, I'm not saying be a pawn in somebody's game or let somebody abuse you. You always have the right to defend yourself or to protect the innocent. But that's a tough one for me, but it's what life's all about. Just those little acts of kindness. Mother Teresa, I like to quote her. She said so many beautiful things. She said, we can't all do great things, but we can do small things with great love. Yeah, and that's just the most beautiful message in heaven. We've got a great future. We don't have to be afraid of dying. And it's all about love. And we're in a tough adventure right now. We're climbing up Mount Everest, and it can be pretty miserable sometimes. But when you go home, boy, does it feel good. Get back home, and there's a big celebration, and all these people you think were gone, are there. People meet their grandparents and their great grandparents, and then they get into these soul groups, and they say, oh, wow, I've got the soul group. I forgot about this, because, we have amnesia down here. So they play these roles, okay, we're going to incarnate, and you're going to be my son and I'll be the father. And next time we'll switch it around, and then we'll have a lifetime where we're enemies, and we'll have a lifetime where we're friends, and we'll have one where we're business partners, and we'll have one where we're married. And they play all these different roles. And we have these eternal friendships on the other side of the veil. I mean, the reality of who we are and our eternal nature is just so beautiful. And it's just, we're just having a dream right now. And it can be tough sometimes.
What about rewriting soul contracts? Are we able to rewrite soul contracts while we're here with our limited understanding from being here and not having the higher self perspective?
Yes. I have heard people even decide to change. They were going to die at a certain age, and they decided to end their life to extend their work down here. They decided to, not end their life at the predetermined time. And they were shown that in heaven. You decided that this is where but you can go back and do more if you want. Yeah, they'll change them.
Yeah, I saw one story where someone who had a lot of health problems had a near-death experience, and they asked, man, this is really hard. Can you guys fix it so that I don't have to go through all of this anymore? And they're like, sure. What else do you want to change? And she said, are you sure it's okay? They're like, yeah, it's okay. What else do you want to change? But there's still certain things that you have to go through, but yeah, there's things that you can change. Um,
We do that here. I go out for a walk with my wife. We're going to walk 5 miles today. Oh God, I'm really tired. You know what? Let's just make it 2. We do that. And souls do that too. Sure.
Yeah, I guess there's some things that are allowed and some things that aren't. I had a psychic reading recently with someone, and she was so good. I called her an oracle, and there were things that I asked her that she explained. It was such a profound effect on me to understand why there was something that I was dealing with and why it was the way that it was. And then I asked about something else, and they weren't allowed to tell me. She wasn't allowed to tell me. She's like, they won't give it up. No, you can't.
Yeah,
So,
they can't help us too much with our homework. We won't learn.
yeah.
So yeah, they're limited. And we tell them that. There's a lot of times in the pre-soul plane, don't help you. How many times does a kid say, you're trying to teach them something? Okay, don't help me, Daddy. I want to do it by myself. That's what we do. I want to try it myself. Yeah.
I was
So, and a
thinking
parent lets them.
yeah, I was thinking about that when you mentioned that. Okay, so does anybody have any other questions?
All right, I'm going to open up the chat window here in case somebody wants to type one.
Yeah, Karen already asked, and I guess I want to give you a chance to share anything that you feel like we haven't touched on, anything that's really big and important, anything that stands out to you in regards to what people have shared with you and with their NDE stories.
Well, I think one of the biggest things right now, especially in this time of chaos, is to stay calm. So, I remember back in 2006, I went to Europe with my family, and I was not big on using credit cards. So I brought around $2,700 cash with me, and I accidentally left it sitting on the table in my hotel room with the door, and my uncle left the door open. So every person walking down the hall, door was at the end of the hall, saw that pile of money. And I had gotten on a train and was going to the Swiss Alps with my family, and some of the most beautiful things I've ever seen that whole day. And there was no going back. And I couldn't call the hotel. My phone service wasn't working. And I knew the money was gone. And I was all upset. And I was in this most beautiful place, the Swiss Alps, and I did not enjoy it. I was miserable all day long. Well, that didn't help. I took a bad situation. I made it worse. Right. And then I got back to the hotel, and it had been straightened by the maid, and it was all still there. So all that worry for nothing. And we do that a lot down here. And in the life reviews, you'll look back and you'll be with your spiritual guides or whatever, and you guys will be laughing at what you got all bent out of shape over, almost like when a kid, you give them an ice cream and it falls on the ground. It's the end of the world. We do that, right? I was freaking out about not having enough money in retirement. Oh, am I going to it's going to be fine. We can't calm the storm, but we can calm ourselves, and the storm's going to pass. And I guess probably the message I want to transmit would be to always know there's a bigger plan. We don't know what's coming, but we always get all the help we need, and we're going to get through it all. We're never given a challenge. I've been told this multiple times. We're never given a challenge that we're incapable of overcoming. And if we don't get it right, we're just going to try it the next time around.
Well, that kind of sounds like
you're always, yeah.
That kind of sounds like you're answering Karen's. Karen, did he just answer your question that you just asked about?
No, I did not read that. Okay. How can we best help those who may have a tough time with coming disclosures? Are we talking about disclosures like government or aliens or what?
Actually, there's a lot. The
Truths.
truth.
Okay, with the truths. Yeah, so that's a tough one. Um, People have been, one of the things I heard early on in my NDE research is that human beings are easily fooled, easily manipulated, and I didn't understand what that meant. Well, now I do. You can see it. The news is a well-crafted fear report. And when somebody's freaking out about something they believe is some impending doom or threat, or they've been convinced that those people are my enemy and they're causing all the problems, there's not much we can do other than just surrender. Don't argue with I don't argue with people on issues. If somebody asks me, I might say, the most I might say is, when they're talking about this horrible thing and that horrible thing, I might just say, well, I have a more positive view of it all. And then I clam up. And so really, I don't try and convince people that they're, believing in all these lies and all that. I just do my best to spread love. And I'm not a policeman. I'm not a judge. My only job here is to love. And if the best I can do is make somebody laugh who's really worried about the state of the world today, or, you can't make people see the truth before they're ready. Over 500 years ago, Copernicus, when he wrote his book on the revolution of the celestial spheres, he worked out the math. We're not the center of the universe with the sun and stars going around us. We're going around the sun at 90 miles a second. They thought he was a mad scientist. He had to delay the publishing of his book till after his death because it was creating this political and social firestorm. And that's nothing new. Alfred Wegener in 1912, he first suggested the idea that continents are slowly drifting across the surface of the earth, and everybody thought he was crazy. And continental drift is a real thing. And in 1841, when Richard Owen examined large bone and teeth fragments, he speculated there were giant lizards roaming the earth that he called Dinosauria. Everybody thought it was a hoax. We are like that first group, first suggesting, like, hey, there's more to life than just these physical bodies. There's this whole other thing. And of course, people are going to think we're crazy, and they're going to believe in their own truths. And the best thing we can do is just be kind and loving, and let them believe in their lies for as long as they need to. People will wake up. It's only a matter of time.
I appreciate that analogy because with like the energy work that I do, any kind of holistic work, the things that you're doing, if we're not authentically showing up, then people will never get this information. They'll never get what they need. And as more truths come out, like what Karen is talking about, people are going to be looking for information. They're going to need answers and understanding. And unless people like us are showing up authentically, there won't be anybody around to help explain. And I'm not saying I'm an authority on anything, I'm, or above anybody. It's just, I know what I know, and I have my own understanding, and I'll be happy to share my perspective with anybody. But if we don't show up and say, this is, how I see it. 6 months ago, we were all being accused of being conspiracy theorists, right? What's the difference between a truth and a conspiracy about 6 months? So,
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, there's a lot of bad stuff going on. And the way things are going to change is individuals changing. So like sustainable off-grid living, that's growing at 30% a year. And there's all this communication going on. When I was new in near-death experiences, it was hard to find near-death experiences in 2007. Geez, on YouTube, there's got to be 10,000 testimonies and probably 50 or 100 channels that focus on it. And there's all this great information out there. And of course, the young generation, the new babies coming in today, they're being born with a different consciousness. Some of them are remembering previous lives. In the Middle East, for example, the young Jewish and the Muslim children are getting together and playing games, and they're saying to their parents, wait a minute, why should I hate this other group? Because our grandfathers and great grandfathers hated each other. We don't care about that. We're starting fresh here. We're all on the same page. And so, yeah, it's going to change with the younger generation. Yeah.
nice. Well, we probably should close up here in the interest of time. Is there any last words you want to share? I think we already did that. I don't want to extend it on too long.
Hmm.
If anyone has any questions, ask now. Otherwise, I think we'll sign off. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for being authentically true to yourself and showing up authentically so that everybody gets a chance to hear these stories. They are so comforting to me. They're fascinating, and I just can't seem to get my hands on enough of them. And each one is like a glimpse of heaven.
Hmm.
So beautiful.
Yeah, they've transformed my life, and I guess what I can say is, when we're dealing with all this crazy stuff going on from heaven, there's a couple of major messages. The first is when we're suffering, they want us to endure our suffering with a joyful dignity and humility. And that's a tough one for me, but I'm learning. And the other thing is they want us to spread love in all circumstances, in all ways possible, as many times as possible, to as many people as possible, and to just be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And they know we're going to make a lot of mistakes down here. So, cut yourself and cut others a lot of slack and keep spreading your light and love. It is the kind of people that would come to a meeting like this who are leading humanity into the new world of love. The new world of love is coming. And it's starting with people like the ones here who are trying to just do one act of compassion at a time. And that's going to change the world. And thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed talking with you and with the group. And you guys asked some good questions. And let's do it again sometime if you're all interested.
Oh, I would love that. Thank you so much. And blessings to you. And we'll just close off for now. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye, everybody.